So hi, I'm Patrick. I'm General Counsel of the Bitcoin Foundation. I don't know how many people here know about the Bitcoin Foundation already. Just show of hands. Okay. So a few. That's good. So everybody else is going to become a member tonight. That's perfect. And that'll be great. So what do? I'm one of 3 officers at the foundation. So that's John Matonis, who's our executive director, Gavin Andreessen, who's our chief scientist, and then me as the general counsel. So I guide public policy and then some other, general counsel lawyerly things. I try and be a bad lawyer because I think that makes me a better Bitcoin lawyer. If that makes sense, it's kind of one way to kind of gauge success in this space, right? Like the more really good lawyers you see all the time, probably the worse the industry is doing generally, right? Like especially like up here talking. What does the Bitcoin Foundation do? We're a member-driven organization, so hopefully, truly, some of you who aren't members become members. Those of you who are members become very engaged members. That would be really great. We have essentially 3 priorities. Our mission is to standardize, promote, and protect the Bitcoin protocol. Our first priority is to make sure that there's technological advancement in the protocol. So paying Gavin a salary helps, paying Vladimir a salary helps. Giving grants for non-commercial development work is really useful. Hiring somebody to do technical documentation, testing all the unsexy aspects of an open source project, things like that. That's our first priority. Our second priority is to build a public policy framework that's sane, so that people can build companies and engage in peer-to-peer transactions safely without fear of being thrown in jail or fined or in prison or anything like that. And then the third one is education. So we do a lot of work to promote Bitcoin and make sure people understand what it is, what it isn't, how to use it safely, things like that. Mostly I'd love to hear just kind of questions, and usually people have a lot of questions on the policy front or the legal front, so I'm here, and yeah, great, let's kick it off.
Banking.
I don't want to be a bank ever, really, so we're definitely not going to start a Bitcoin Foundation bank. A lot of people have tried the idea of a credit union, right, to form like a cryptocurrency credit union, something like that. That's been floated. What we've been doing is just engagement. So I go speak at events like ACAMS International, talking to compliance officers and BSA officers and educating them on the protocol, how to manage risk appropriately and safely so that they can onboard new customers, whether at the exchange level or the individual level. I've spoken at FinCEN, their Bank Secrecy Act Advisory Group, the Treasury Department, so we've spoken directly to banks. Some of the major banks, we've sat around roundtables with banks, both their strategic folks and the BSA compliance officers. About last year in the fall, right before the Senate hearings, we did a study. It was not a scientific study, it was very informal, just a survey really, saying, what are the top threats, what are the risks to Bitcoin being widely adopted? And the one thing that surfaced over and over and over again is that banks won't bank Bitcoin companies, banks won't bank individuals who buy and sell Bitcoin, right? So we made it a priority to start targeting this problem through engagement, just education, getting banks to understand what the risk is and what it isn't. One of the things that I learned engaging with banks is that there really isn't some like cabal to keep Bitcoin out or to put Bitcoin down. Banks will bank Bitcoin exchanges and banks will bank Bitcoin businesses. If they feel like they can both manage the risk and that they can make some money at it. Right now, if you're a Bitcoin exchange, it is very, very difficult to get a bank account. And it's difficult for a number of reasons, but the primary reason is it's actually quite tricky to manage the risk right now around a Bitcoin exchange if you're a bank, where you'll be held liable, both in money laundering, OFAC sanctions, things like that. And at the same time, it's not a business that's going to just throw off a lot of money, right, for the bank. It's not a relationship that's going to generate a ton of revenue. So it's what's called a managed relationship, which means they have to hire a compliance individual specifically for you as the Bitcoin exchange, maybe 2 or 3. Maybe they have to sit one in your office. That costs a lot, and that's like something that once they scale it up, you don't just scale it down if that relationship evaporates. So it's quite an investment on the banking side to to actually bank a real Bitcoin exchange that has any throughput. At the same time, these exchanges aren't really driving huge amounts of volume, right? Most of the banks, the kind of risky customers they want to bank are medicinal marijuana dispensaries, because they just throw off cash, like tons of cash, and the banks are pressing to bank those customers as fast as they can. Bitcoin companies, they're kind of like, yeah, we get that there's potential, there's some strategic value in picking one to partner with, over time, but it's not a real revenue generator right now. So it's a bit chicken egg, and it's a tough problem to solve. The bank, Bitcoin exchanges, the more of those that come online, because once exchange integrates into the traditional financial system through banking, what it does is it creates a lot of transparency in the network for the law enforcement community. So everybody really wants it to happen. It's really just a matter of how do you figure out managing the risks, and at the same time create an economic incentive to do that as a bank. So that's what the real issues generally boil down to. Friendly, and some states are less friendly. You can kind of map it out a little bit, but in the U.S. there are 50 states, right? Again, I don't do math, or I wouldn't have gone to law school, so I think it's 50, right? Okay. So of the 50, you have 48 that have money transmitter licenses, really, right? And you have like Montana and South Carolina. They just don't really care what you do. And they also don't have much of a population, so you can't really, build business there for a Bitcoin exchange per se. But you have 48 other states. Of those states, they're definitely on a sliding scale, right, of what's permissible and what's not without a license. And it varies quite a bit. It even varies how they would interpret the same sentence in the same statute, right, state to state. So it's why I refer to the U.S. as a payments technology backwater, right, because you had this crazy quilt of like states and regulatory bureaucracy that you have to navigate. You're not dealing with one country, you're dealing with 48 states and the federal government, so you have 49 countries to negotiate with for a license. And it's difficult. And it depends a lot on your business model. So if you're a true exchange where you're holding fiat balances and you're holding cryptocurrency balances, then that's a very high regulatory profile in just about every state. If you're doing something different, like you have probably the safest, lowest profile Bitcoin exchange model that you could come up with is kind of the Coinbase type of ACH push-pull on the fiat side, where you're never holding a fiat balance, and you're direct selling cryptocurrency into a multi-sig wallet where you never have custody or control of it. I mean, that's going to reduce your regulatory burden on a state-by-state basis to just a handful of states. And I'll give another shout out to Texas, because I got a free t-shirt the last time I did. But Texas definitely clears the way for that. So they have a big population. First things I did when I kind of started the foundation as a full-time gig, I'm one of the founding members, but I did most of my work at the foundation part-time and volunteer. And I wasn't getting paid, which was a lot of fun to work that hard. Then I started getting paid in August, and one of the first things I did was identify, okay, we need to hire somebody who can own public policy, just as that's their job. And so the person we ended up hiring is a guy, Jim Harper. So he worked at the Cato Institute, but he was also PayPal's lobbyist on the Hill back in the day. And so he's guiding a lot of that strategy. So it's in the cards. But to be in DC and to be super active and engaged, as if somehow if we can just teach people, then they're going to create these really great regulations which just open the door, and they're going to create a regulation to deregulate everything. And that's just not how the regulatory environment works. It's not how government affairs works. It's not how lobbying works. Like, Bitcoin needs probably, I think there are 2 registered lobbyists right now, Bitcoin issues, one from MasterCard, one from somebody I've never heard of before. And we probably, 0 would be the optimal number of lobbyists. And from the community, probably 0 is still, close to the number, maybe 1, 2, 3, something like that. What you don't want to do is start having a bunch of different voices coming to the Hill and start drumming up interest in Bitcoin. That's the DC death wish part, right? The more that people decide that the answer to Bitcoin's problems are in DC, the bigger the problem is going to get. So generally, lobbyists like to create work for themselves. I mean, if I'm being cynical. So anybody who's got a fixer in DC is probably a dangerous person, whether they know it or not. As far as IRS guidance, what's come out, what is your kind of tax reporting duty? It's typical capital gains. So it's just like buying a stock, right? So you buy some Bitcoin, it appreciates about $100 a coin in value. You sell some, you have a capital gain of about $100, whether it's short term or long term, depends on how long you held it. But that's how you would treat it. That's how you treat all your transactions in Bitcoin right now, which is a bit unfortunate because just at a policy level, I mean, Treasury's kind of, IRS was forced into a bit of a box there because they don't really have anything like called Bitcoin to deal with, and they don't have a close analogy. It's kind of either property, which is treated like typical capital gains and losses, or you have foreign currency. And just by definition, Bitcoin isn't foreign currency. It's not a currency issued by another government. So it's de facto property. But what happens is then you don't get this $200 exemption that you get with foreign currency that was lobbied for, mainly because a lot of people just didn't report the fact that they went to London and did currency exchange in pounds and bought something over there, and they may have accrued a small capital gains in that purchase, which is insane to think that somebody would actually be able to capture that. So everybody just didn't report it. The IRS didn't really want people trying to report that stuff because it was just a massive paperwork that was frankly meaningless as far as actual collections. And you know, that was pushed through in a $200 exemption. We're going to be filing comments with the IRS suggesting that it's probably a good idea that even though Bitcoin is property and treated as property, that a similar $200 exemption exists for Bitcoin.
So for the tax
police Bitcoin for tax evasion, essentially.
yeah.
I mean, they'll police it the same way they do everything, right? There's going to be a mix of reporting, self-reporting, and just, you know, general investigatory work, right? So, I mean, if you had bearer instruments, if you had a Panama bearer shares company that you had, you know, an interest in, how would they ever track that down, right? Somebody would either report it, you'd report it, or you'd be evading the law. And if they ever caught up to you, then there'd be an issue there, and a big issue. Now, as far as the anonymity on the network, I don't know how anonymous Bitcoin really is right now, so I don't know if I would trust that if I were looking to evade taxes. So how many people in here, when you surf the web, how many people here just go on surfing the web feel like they're anonymous? Okay. You? You do? You must have a really strong Tor network connection. Yeah, exactly, right?
So the problem is the JavaScript. Lots of websites ask you to enable your JavaScript. So that's a problem.
Around and everybody hopefully is evangelizing about Bitcoin and getting people involved. You're doing people a disservice if you pretend that Bitcoin is anonymous, right? I mean, one, it's technically wrong, and two, what you're doing is you're setting people up to do stupid things and take a big fall, right? And that's what that's what happened with the Silk Road, right? Everybody kind of talked about it being an anonymous currency, and what you're seeing is one of the biggest roll-ups in history, because they're able to go back to the blockchain and figure out who everybody is. And so it just did everybody a big disservice to pretend that Bitcoin is somehow more anonymous than it is. It's not even private right now, which is a real problem. We need more privacy-enhancing features on the blockchain in a big way. So hopefully startups in the room, you know, go for it. Yeah, question.
So what is...
There's no business model in Bitcoin, but I would basically say that it's always a challenge to come up with a viable business model when you're building a true Bitcoin company, because most business models are focused on re-intermediating or becoming an intermediary, and the whole point of the network is to disintermediate all the intermediaries. So when you have a network that resists intermediation, it's difficult to come up with a pure play business model. You know, again, I always talk about Satoshi Dice as being one of the most pure Bitcoin, you know, companies that's ever existed to date. It still is. It also had a great business model, obviously. I mean, they made a lot of money. And it was just providing a service and taking a rate. It's pretty straightforward. I think those are the business models that will be successful. So you can kind of lump things in. There's either I'm going to build a business that makes Bitcoin better, right? Or I'm going to build a business that uses Bitcoin to make something else better. I mean, hopefully we're going to start seeing more of the companies, the startups come around that are using Bitcoin to make something else better, because Bitcoin, the network, the decentralized, disintermediated network, creates some sort of an efficiency that my competitors who are stuck in legacy models and traditional models can't replicate very easily.
Actually, my question is, that's my question.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, we haven't quite got Gavin convinced to levy a Bitcoin tax yet on all transactions, but, and I say that as a joke, please don't, like, I can see the next post on Reddit already. So, no, we do it, we collect membership dues, that's it. We're member funded, both by industry members and individual members. So, for all the members here, thank you.
What is going to be the foundation's position on technologies like that?
Plans? Can you comment?
Well, I have no idea what our plans were when we started it. I mean, there were like 2 people in Bitcoin, so it was, you know, obviously everything has gotten way bigger, way faster than anybody could have predicted. But you know, we have a healthy treasury balance because all our member dues are paid in Bitcoin. We're 90% into Bitcoin at all times. So as Bitcoin goes up in price, we have a great endowment, and we're very well aligned to keeping the system and the ecosystem growing rapidly. But yeah, we've got a large membership group that's growing fast, and we're developing local chapters all around the world to help localize our efforts and drive new membership. So yeah, I think we're definitely turning a corner here.
Adding new developers.
Yeah, we want to hire more developers. So we've got Gavin and Vladimir on staff who work on Bitcoin Core full time. We have some in-house development stuff just for membership portals and things like that to support that. We definitely are looking to hire testing, people who want to do testing, and technical documentation. So I think we're going to hire somebody to do technical documentation real soon. I think we've got some candidates that we've sorted, and we're happy with that. But it's that kind of grunt work, that really unsexy stuff that no one really wants to do in an open source project. Like, that's what we need to hire for. We need to hire a lot of it. So if anybody's looking for a job doing testing, let me know. And I see all the hands flying up because everybody loves it. Bitcoin friendly in the U.S. Hard to say because it goes back to the banking conversation. When I think there are actually probably more than you think. It's just actually being able to prove that you have a business model that's going to make sense, or that you're strategically relevant enough for them to go out on a limb and bank you and spend a lot of time and effort working with you to understand how to manage the risk. It's very much going to be a symbiotic relationship, unless it's a bank that's already banked Bitcoin companies, and then they might feel like they already have enough exposure strategically. So I think there are plenty of friendly ones. It's more on the business side, or how do you move the needle to show them that you're strategically important. And I think you'll find that including some of the biggest ones in the country. I mean, all the big banks have looked at this, and all of them find it strategically very interesting. It's really just a matter of identifying. It's kind of like raising money from a VC. Like, they're all interested, but there is some reputation risk too at stake for them. And so most banks want to be the second bank to bank a Bitcoin company.
So who does the foundation bank with?
We use Silicon Valley Bank.
Maybe it's the tour.
If everybody's familiar with Swift Network, so it was in Cyprus, it was in Dubai last year. It's like all the big correspondent banks. I mean, if you want to talk about something that's going to die soon, it's correspondent banking. That thing is ridiculous, that whole system. But you'll know if you ever try and send money from one side of the world to the other, and it's like, do it twice, and you'll get like 2 different amounts on the other end. It's weird. So it just totally makes no sense. So I was there, and I kind of gave what I call my I have a dream speech, right? So I have a dream that one day I'm going to walk into my local Bank of America branch, I'm going to walk up to the teller and buy my Bitcoin there and sell it there. And there's no reason why banks can't be banking Bitcoin companies themselves, right? They have every reason to do it if they find it strategically relevant. They have the compliance in-house, they have the brand, they have the trust of their customers. It would be a piece of cake for them to turn on a Bitcoin exchange, Bitcoin service. And I would not be surprised if in the next year to 2 years you see a bank finally bite the bullet and become a Bitcoin service company themselves to one degree or another. Play, that doesn't mean they're going to make that play. If a bank were to make a Bitcoin play, I don't think they would just try and replicate exactly what they do in their other sectors. They would probably think, where's the advantage to using the Bitcoin network? And that's probably on the payment side, maybe on the clearing side, right? So maybe they'll offer, maybe there's some P2P like payment stuff that they could do for their customers that's more interoperable than anything they have now, right?
Right, I guess more generically, like if anyone want to replicate the whole banking model and try to create fractional reserve kind of thing and start lending out money, extra Bitcoin supply, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, give it about a year, and maybe a year and a half, and sidechains will be implemented, and then it will be like a perfect method for doing just that kind of thing. The chapter program, I mean, it's a collaborative thing. I mean, essentially what we're trying to do is find teams of people who are local to a specific country who can represent our membership in that country, right? So in Germany, for example, in Canada and Mexico and those countries. Now, as far as like grants and sponsorships, that's another thing that we do that's separate. So like we sponsor Bitcoin.org, right? We gave a grant to CoinPump, HTML5 wallet. So we're willing to give grants and sponsorships to different organizations. Generally, the criteria is that you're doing something that has no commercial applicability. In other words, it's work that wouldn't get done for the ecosystem otherwise, but for the fact that the foundation is willing to give you a little bit of funding to get it off the ground and running. But if it's valuable, then yeah, we definitely want to help. So on the educational side, something like Bitcoin.org. If it's on the technical side, any different implementation outside of Bitcoin Core is, highly desirable. More implementations is better. More diversity of implementations is a really positive thing, and that's something that we would really look to fund.
Consider crowdfunding?
So, would we consider crowdfunding stuff, or crowdfunding our own efforts, or any? Do we like I like crowdfunding. I think it's cool. I mean, I talked to Mike, when he was quitting Google and all that, and we talked a little bit about him maybe becoming like a Bitcoin Foundation fellow or something to just work on protocol and security issues, because I know that's what he wants to do. And I think that what he's doing with Lighthouse is awesome. I think it's great. I think it's a great way to deal with a big problem that he's trying to solve, which is you have somebody who's super talented who wants to dedicate themselves to building decentralized infrastructure, and how do you fund that sustainably? I mean, becoming a Bitcoin Foundation fellow will carry him for maybe a year or something, but that's not one that doesn't actually help the community support the efforts, right? You're just relying on the foundation then to go do that work on the back end. When arguably the community should be coming together and supporting those efforts. So I think what Mike's doing is awesome. I love it. I mean, does everybody know what Mike Kern's doing with Lighthouse? Is that familiar? So essentially, he's going to take the risk and build out decentralized infrastructure, right? And he'll let you see it enough to validate that it's like a real thing that works, but he's not going to release it until a certain threshold is met as far as a bounty being paid. And to do that, he actually went ahead and built the first decentralized infrastructure application, which is Lighthouse, which is a crowdfunding platform that allows you to pay him. So he built the whole thing, and he's going to release it as soon as enough people decide to pay him through it. So good for him. I love it.
Who's this? Mike Kern?
Yeah, Mike Kern. Yeah. And how you run them and all that other stuff. In some cases, that raises no issues in my mind, which is good.
What would be those cases?
Depends on where you put it and whether it's 2 ways, 1 way, or you're doing any kind of KYC identity verification.
So give us the right way and the wrong way.
The right way is go set one up in Texas, right? Because they said that that's the direct buy and sale of Bitcoin, and cryptocurrency is not a regulated activity under state money transmitter laws. So there you go, all over Texas, you should be littered with Bitcoin ATMs soon. Until they realize their mistake. Until they realize how enlightened they were. So it really depends. There's one in Washington State now, and I know the company that did that. They worked closely with the Washington State DFI to make sure that they were compliant and they were playing by the rules. I think they actually got a license, even though it's pretty easily. It wasn't very difficult. I think Pennsylvania has issued an opinion letter saying you don't need a license to run a Bitcoin ATM. There are a handful of states. You can write a letter to your local kind of DFI or whatever state you want to enter and just say, hey, can I operate this thing or not? Unless they're New York, they'll probably get back to you. And stay away from New York. People on the board. We don't put anybody on the board, and so the vetting process for being a board member of the Bitcoin Foundation is the election process.
Right. So are you going to do a better job?
Well, it's not my job to do it. It's the members' job to do a better job. If you disagree with it, vote different or convince the membership to vote differently. I don't have any say in it. If we started vetting candidates, here's the real issue. If I started vetting candidates, then I would be censoring the community on who they feel should be representing the Bitcoin Foundation.
You could pay money for someone to investigate the people that you put in.
But again, why would I so everybody would get investigated and then they'd release a dossier on them. That doesn't sound very appealing if I wanted to run for something. Number one. Number two, that if you're referring to the latest election, all that information was publicly available. I mean, people were actually talking about it actively during the election. The fact is, people just didn't care. Or didn't care enough to sway their vote. And it's not really my, you know, I have my opinions on it, you have your opinions on it, but democracy's messy. It's not really my job to say who should or shouldn't be on the board of directors.
So why should people join a foundation that is, you know, full of people who are shady and just going to steal people's money? Speaking as a foundation member who's thinking of quitting.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's up to you. I mean, it's your individual choice. I would suggest to you that if you want to see change in the foundation, become active, make the change happen. I mean, I could say the same thing about the U.S. I could renounce my citizenship and move somewhere else. I mean, people do that. People make that choice. It's really an individual choice for you to make. But what I don't want to do is create a Bitcoin foundation that is top-down, where you have a handful of people saying, here are the people who should be representing Bitcoin. I'd rather have a Bitcoin foundation that has a diverse membership, where they're selecting who should be representing Bitcoin, and I can just disagree, or I can agree, or I can just be pragmatic about it and just say, it is what it is. Considering, I mean, that was, now in Bitcoin years, that was like, you know, 7 years, is that what a dog year is in Bitcoin? So it was a long time, it was last summer. So given that, I thought it was pretty high, the interest level. I mean, the fact that anybody would talk to me was nice. So yeah, I mean, people didn't get it. I mean, they're getting it more and more.
Any example of Bitcoin being used for cross-border money transfers so far?
Yeah, and just to finish up on your first point, the people who did have a real, sincere, invested interest in Bitcoin was Swift. Swift has a lot of interest in Bitcoin. They're very, very interested in the technology from the top down. CEO of Swift is a fan of Bitcoin and likes it. And they're very interested in seeing it for a number of different reasons that you could possibly imagine. Have I seen cross-border transactions? Sure. I mean, Roger Ver sends, transactions back to suppliers, from San Jose to China for his memory dealers company all the time. It's pretty useful. I think you're going to see it pick up, accelerate quite a bit, because that's a pain point that's very easily solved.